the Chair of Asian American Studies at UC Davis and the co-convener. Good evening.
Good evening.
So the full title of this symposium is Contemporary Asian American Activism and Intergenerational Perspectives. Among our objectives for this symposium is not only to make visible the social justice struggles Asian American activists are leading today, but to also make visible the fact that we have been at the forefront of social justice struggles for generations. Indeed, the struggles of today draw direct and indirect lines of connection to earlier struggles that are not often adequately appreciated. My own role in this symposium can be traced to intergenerational connections. I am an alum of UCSB, Gaucho. My activism began right here on this campus. My political consciousness as an Asian American was awoken by my mentor, now colleague, scholar activist Diane Fugino, in the courses that she taught, as well as the programming I attended in this very room. Significantly, the activism I was inspired by was the activism of our keynote speaker this evening. An activist across 5 decades, Pam Tao Li is the current chair of the Chinese Progressive Association and the International Coalition for Human Rights in the Philippines, US. She attributes her continued engagement to her grounding as a youth in the liberation movements of the late 60s and 70s. This early grounding led her to organizing the community, labor movements, and eventually the environmental justice movement. Ms. Lee began her activism in San Francisco's Chinatown and with UC Berkeley's Asian American Political Alliance. She was soon working with Bay Area Asians Against the War, and with the Multinational League of Revolutionary Struggle. Ms. Lee was a contributor to the first National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit with her paper, Workers of Color, Unfair Choices. She was recruited to the UC School of Public Health to work in the field of occupational environmental health and was the research field director for 2 landmark worker health research studies that resulted in policy changes for workers of color, immigrants, and victims of wage theft. In 2017, she was a keynote speaker at the People's Climate March in Washington, D.C., and has been appointed to numerous committees, including the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health's Occupational Research Agenda Advisory Committee. Ms. Lee has also earned numerous accolades for her activism, including the American Public Health Association Lauren Kerr Award, and along with Tom Goldtooth, Richard Moore, and Harold Mitchell, she was inducted into the Hall of Resistance in the Ancient African Enslavement and Civil War Museum in Selma, Alabama in 2015. Now considered an elder, she especially enjoys being in intergenerational spaces to build power and unity for social and economic liberation. Please join me in welcoming Pam Tao Li.
Hello, everybody. I walked around and met many of you, and what I learned is that you're here because you care about the water, about the land, and about the sky. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. So what I'd like you to do is what I do every morning is I go out my back door, I look up at the sky, I stand there, and I go like this. Please stand up. And with your hands, embrace the sky and all that it is, and bring it to you. And that is what we're here to do together. Huh? We are going to protect the sky,
Uh-huh.
the water, the land, our four-legged, the species, and each other. You can do this, right?
Yes.
Uh-huh. Teach elder.
So I'm honored here to be here tonight. This weekend is going to be contributing to really uplifting the work, the voices, the stories, the vision of Asian activism and organizing. And thank you, Karen, for writing that chapter. I read it all the time. I'm very honored to be able to be invited here with the other participants who will be speaking. You'll be meeting here tomorrow. Would you please raise your hands? All of you on the panel, raise your hands. Eddie, stop taking. There you go. Come back tomorrow and meet these amazing people. I'm excited also because I understand that right here in Santa Barbara, you have won ethnic studies in the high schools. Is that right? Ethnic studies played a huge role in who I am and how I got here tonight. And so congratulations, Santa Barbara, on this great victory. The title of my talk is The Struggle to Abolish Environmental Racism, and it's spelled wrong up there. Asian Radical Imagining from the Homeland to the Front Line. And my talk here tonight is going to be divided into 4 parts. Bear with me. The first part is my personal and political grounding. The second part is about environmental justice. The third part is called I Got Your Back, We Got Your Back. And the fourth part is think and act like a majority. Oh, there you are. My early family years were spent in Chinatown, and much of the time was with my grandmother, Alice. She's sitting on the far end over there. She was basically a single mom who raised my mom and my 2 uncles on welfare. My maternal grandfather was struggling with alcohol and drug addiction, and he wasn't around much. The pressures of poverty and racism made his addiction worse. So you'll notice that in this picture, he's not there. Grandma Alice worked at the Dalai garment factory, which produced Levi overalls and jeans. And I spent a lot of time with her in that factory, as my parents both worked and Grandma took care of me during the week. While I have shared scattered memories of being on the 2nd floor of this factory with 50 loud sewing machines blaring, there's one moment that stands clearly out for me. I was 7 years old, sitting at the foot of my grandmother's machine. I was probably eating a snack because you know how grandmas are. And when there was a horrible scream, followed by women rushing towards a seamstress whose hand was caught in the sewing machine. Women brought towels and soaked up the blood, and someone else helped get her hand out from under that needle. Next, I remember the elevator door, because I just sat right across from the elevator door, swinging open, and the boss man came storming out. He was shouting to everybody, "Get back to work, get back to work," in Chinese, of course, scolding the woman whose hand was bleeding. His shouting was met by women shouting back at him. Yeah. Others gathered the injured woman's belongings and escorted her out of the factory. The boss continued to glare like this, I'll never forget it, at everybody as the sound of the sewing machines came back again. I was a little girl. I was standing there in shock when Grandma, in a commanding voice, turned to me and she said, "Akin, did you see what happened?" And I nodded yes. She points to the boss standing across the room. "Do you know who he is?" And I answered, "Lo Ban, the boss." "Do you know why he acts like that?" Pause. "It's because he's mean and too much soy sauce." I remember being surprised because I never heard my grandma so angry like that before. The words that came out of her mouth. But secondly, I call this my first soy sauce moment. I call it soy sauce because over time, the flavor of soy sauce, if it's good soy sauce, gets stronger and better appreciated and understood, like that moment for me in the factory. Her question forced me to process what I just saw. Etched in my mind is that innocent incident that was horrible, scary, violent, and part of the daily life in the sewing factory. As a little girl, I began to take more and more notice at when women were crying, when they were angry and talking with each other. But most important, I remember women practicing compassion in a way that I had never seen before. So experiences like these were not just isolated to my family in Chinatown. In Chinatown, women and men, like my grandmother, worked 6 days a week, 10 hours a day in a cramped, noisy, unsafe sweatshop. She and her peers were what I call super exploited. Super exploited because of the unspoken policies that result in sweatshop working conditions and wage conditions. The system of super exploitation squeezes super profits from the employment of workers of color, especially women and immigrants. Chinatown is a creation of exclusionary laws, confining the Chinese to live in a certain area of San Francisco. Working in places like Chinatown was worse than for workers employed outside of Chinatown, our Chinese brothers and sisters who were fortunate in that way, and there were very few. This is the underbelly side of our economic system that made families like those who own the Levi jeans factories so wealthy. In addition, low wages means families live in single room occupancy, an 8 by 10 foot single room with a shared toilet down the hall, no shower facilities, maybe one window to an air shaft, or if you were lucky, over the street. Our rooms that I shared with my grandmother never looked over the street. And our rooms were always closer to the toilets because the further you were away from the toilets, the better it was and the rents were higher. The closer to the toilet and the stinky facilities, the rents were lower. And that's where we were. The lack of fresh air and decent rest made for conditions ripe for tuberculosis. My father had tuberculosis, and I regularly tested positive for tuberculosis. For most immigrant Asian families, this was and is their environment. It stems from a legacy of racism. I call this environmental racism. The justice is yet to come. Even though these factories are no longer a part of Chinatown, the legacy of poor working and living conditions still make Chinatown residents more vulnerable than most residents in San Francisco. After the 13 days of smoke from a recent campfire fire, I emailed my friend Vida, who lives in Chinatown, and asked her about the air quality. This is what she wrote back to me. It's hard to get fresh air, especially for folks who don't have access to a window. That isn't facing another wall. Windows are the only source to circulate the air to the shared bathrooms, the kitchens, and the hallways. And with the smoke being so thick and being told to stay indoors and close the windows, it's even harder to get fresh air. We depend on the outdoor air for everyday living. We use the rooftops to dry our clothes, with spaces being tight, public spaces like the Portsmouth Square is our living room. And with the lack of circulation, it's like our living rooms are being polluted now. not just for folks who live in the SRO, but also the homeless folks. It's like a slow Armageddon that people are used to. Like we're walking in a cloud of smoke, doing our thing, heads bent down into our phones. People don't know what hit them because this climate change is the slowest kind of poison. My experiences with Grandma Alice sharpened my awareness of what it meant to be Chinese in the US, a Chinese woman, and also what environmental looked and felt like for those living in Chinatown. Rooted in the resilience of my family and with the civil rights movement, the assassinations of MLK and JFK, and especially the Black Power movement that rose up in 1969, I began fighting for ethnic studies with others at Cal State Hayward. The period of the 1960s and the 1970s shaped how I understood the world. I was 21, I was on campus, and I was introduced to the Black Power tradition and the liberation movements. It was the year that Robin talked and Diane talked about at the San Francisco strike in state that fought for ethnic studies college. Students were rejecting white ethnocentric curriculum, and they were demanding an education that would equip us to change the world and would equip us to identify and imagine a new system of governance for the people. George Murray, a San Francisco State activist, instructor, and minister of the education for the Black Panther Party, challenged us to study the root cause of the war in Vietnam and to counter white supremacy with a vision of Black power. Black power, he said, power for all persons of African, Asian, Latin America, or Native descent in the U.S., as well as power for progressive whites. All power to the people, not power to the government which oppresses. All power to the people to change the system. All power that grows out of being internationalists, which was what the Black Panthers displayed when the Black Panthers came to San Francisco, Chinatown, to check out a group of young Chinese activists who they heard were pretty radical, pretty hip, pretty sly, targets of police brutality, and were politically savvy. Upon meeting, these Black Panthers led study sessions and talked about the Panther 10-point program with these young people. Inspired by the leadership of the Black Panthers, these young people wanted to join the Black Panthers. But it was Bobby Seale that said, no, you form your own group, grounded in your own struggle. And thus came the formation of the San Francisco Red Guards. This is how I've come to understand Black power. Power grounded in our legacy of struggle to change the system. In 1972, I joined the San Francisco chapter of Iwo Kun, a merger of Iwo Kun and the members of the Black Panther, inspired by the core of women who led the organization and the Black Panther and the IWK program. The organization, IWK's vision, aligned with my living experience and the outline framed by the Black Power movement. Iwo Kun was not a copy of the Black Panther Party. Iwo Kun was an important entity of her own that uplifted the role of Asians in making radical change in the U.S. and internationally. Parts of the Iwo Kun program that especially spoke to me was, Asian people in America have been continually oppressed by greedy and treacherous people in our own communities and wider exploitative society. We want an end to male chauvinism, sexual exploitation. We want a world of peace where the needs of the people come first and is without class distinction and is based on the love and unity of all people. Thanks, I needed to take a breath. For the next 20 years, I was a proud member of Iwakun, which later merged with the August 29th movement and the Congress of African People and East Wind. Mo, raise your hand. Brother there, member of East Wind, my comrade, Mo. We merged to become the League of Revolutionary Struggle. As a member of IWK, I was proud to have been a part of this important historic movement that involved being in the fight to stop the evictions of Filipino and Chinese tenants from the International Hotel. How many of you have heard about the International Hotel? All right. Okay. Google that. The Vietnam anti-war movement, the student movement. I became involved in labor organizing and as a founder of the Chinese Progressive Association. Later, I helped found the Asian Pacific Labor Alliance, the Asian Pacific Environmental Network, the Just Transition Alliance, and now I'm a proud chair of the Coalition for Human Rights in the Philippines. All of you global environmental people, check them out. The organizing skills and discipline that I learned being a member of IWK was invaluable. We learned the importance of study that worked to be turned into action and practice. So it's not study with the words sitting on a piece of paper. It is taking those words out into the community and making change in the world. When we got tired or disappointed, we lifted each other's up. But most importantly, we were grounded in the love and unity of all peoples. One of the most important moments during this period was the peace movement to bring peace to Southeast Asia in 1970s. In 1972, myself and other Asians, mainly from Iwakun and other Asian campus youth, we attended a meeting for an upcoming Asian April anti-war march and rally. We wanted the program to, in addition to the issue of peace that they were organizing around, we wanted them to introduce the concepts of U.S. empire, the building of escalation for war, the plundering for oil, and the targeting of Asia as a source for cheap labor. We wanted also to build support for the self-determination of the Vietnamese people and their plan for peace. Mm-hmm. Instead of welcoming us, this mainstream peace movement refused to include us. We were told that we were bringing too many isms into their space. Mm-hmm. This is where I first heard about this kind of stuff. We were kicked out of the meeting and instead left. They then focused on the theme, bring the boys home. Okay, so we left the building, but we're not going to stifle the delivery of our message. Would you? No. So we went back onto campus and into the community, and we mobilized for an Asian contingent. On the day of the march and rally, we assembled together. We had our own chants, and we introduced something called the snake dance. And when we got to the rally, we snake danced. Means like this, we're all holding, and we're snake dancing. Just in case you don't know what that means. Chanting, one struggle, many fronts. The crowd got up and parted ways and made a path for us. A group of us, including myself, joined on the stage holding the different flags of Asia, and we took over the mic. We were respectful, and in the 7 minutes, Patsy Chan delivered our message to the cheers of tens of thousands of people. Our work to grow an Asian anti-war movement blossomed from that day and grew. History, I believe, has proven that the position that we took was correct, that stopping the war was not just about bringing the boys home, but was also about raising the consciousness of the U.S. thirst for empire and power and resources through the interference and the war and of the U.S. military and interference in governing in those different countries. The lives also of the Vietnamese people there and the Asian and people here in the U.S. were disrupted. That was a period of huge division in our country. Today, Vietnam is no longer under the semi-colonial control of the U.S., and the people in the country are thriving. You should go there. I was just there last year. The Vietnamese people are slowly reclaiming the forests and the lands that was destroyed by U.S. Agent Orange bombings, along with the spirit of the people and the families of those who have been permanently disabled because of the war. Military presence in Asia is strong and expanding. Today, as we speak, the people of Okinawa are staging a hunger strike and have been fighting the expansion of a U.S. military base there, expanding it. They're already there. Not only has this caused havoc for the people, but it is responsible for the pollution of the waters and the land. You do know, don't you, that it's the U.S. military that is the biggest polluter globally. And because of that, around Okinawa, there is a potential extinction of sea life there, fishing and certain species. In the Philippines, the construction of a huge military base for the operation of U.S. drones has displaced thousands of Filipino farmers and indigenous, and has destroyed precious land, and is also setting the stage for escalated political tension in the Philippines and all of Asia. This period made for a revolutionary moment that captured my heart, and my mind, and grounded me to have a very fulfilling life, working with others to change the world, to resist, to reimagine, and to struggle with revolutionary love. So, moving forward to 1990, my next grounding moment was when I was introduced to the vision and the analysis that would be presented at the People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit to be held in Washington, D.C. Now, who here has heard of the principles of environmental justice? The next time I come back, all of you should be raising your hands, okay? In 1990, my day job was at UC Berkeley at the Center for Occupational and Environmental Health, where I was able to utilize my previous experience as a community organizer and later as an organizer, community organizer, and later as a labor organizer. It was there early on that I received a call from Dana Austin from the Panels Institute, who had asked me if I had heard of this upcoming summit, People of Color Leadership Summit, and if I had known about Cancer Alley. I said, no, I never heard about it. 2 weeks later, she met. She took the time to tell me about Cancer Alley, the Bikini Islands, and the native historical lands, places that were targets of environmental racism. But she affirmed for me that where there is oppression, there is resistance. And she described how the local communities were organizing and fighting back. She explained that there was a growing movement to abolish these conditions and that movement would be launched at the upcoming summit. That meeting with Dana changed my life. She invited me to be a member of the planning committee. A week later, Charles Lee, a Chinese American who was the researcher and author of the landmark Toxic Waste and Race, called to ask me to write and submit a paper to the summit focused on workers of color and to facilitate a discussion on that issue. The result of that was the adoption of principle number 8 in the 17 principles, which reads, environmental justice affirms the right of all workers to a safe and healthy work environment without being forced to choose between an unsafe livelihood and employment. It also affirms the right of those who work at home to be free from environmental hazards. As an Asian, I was extremely proud to be asked to address this issue. That is so much a day-to-day part of our community. The abolition of environmental racism would become through movement building. Movement building as an aim to abolish the racism and achieve environmental justice. This was captured in the preamble of the summit. The preamble reads, and it's up here, I have it for you because I just feel it's really, really important. We, the people of color, gathered together at this multinational People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit to begin to build a national and international movement of all peoples of color to fight the destruction and taking of our lands and community. Do hereby reestablish our spiritual interdependentness with the sacredness of our Mother Earth, to respect and celebrate each of our cultures, our languages, and beliefs about the natural world, and our roles in healing ourselves, to ensure environmental justice, to promote economic alternatives which would contribute to the development of environmentally safe livelihoods, and to secure our political, economic, and cultural liberation that has been denied for over 500 years of colonization and oppression, resulting in the poisoning of our communities and land and the genocide of our people. We do affirm and adopt these principles of environmental justice. That's sweet, thank you. I think so too. The summit launched the movement for environmental justice, which called on the world to protect the ecology and to learn to live in balance with Mother Earth, and call out the role of racial monopoly capitalism, call out white supremacy, call out patriarchy, and call out colonization. Mm-hmm. It calls for the building of power for the grassroots to speak and act for themselves, self-determination, sovereignty, and would promote economic alternatives. Economic alternatives. You could do that. It called on us to challenge the fossil fuel industry, the government, and the military with a demand that we as a society and as a world move away from dirty energy, war, and plunder, and to restore and protect the environment. But our elder, do you know Grace Lee Boggs? Oh yeah. Grace Lee Boggs states that the principles of environmental justice is no less than the foundation of a new constitution. Every environmental group should discuss this. Every class in public health should discuss these periodically. I fully agree. And also for me, the summit and these principles have enabled me to develop a lifetime of friendships and the establishment of an I got your back and we got each other back relationships that have endured the test of time. Standing Rock. You heard about Standing Rock? Yeah. Oh, I was going to start with this. So this is the banner that has been to Standing Rock. This is a sign that was outside the U.S. Corps of Army Engineers. And that banner there that fell down is probably tired, because that banner was first unfurled in Paris at the COP 21 there, and it's been around the world. So I understand why that's so nice. It's tight. Standing Rock and the movements to stop the Dakota Access Pipeline brought the words of the Preamble and the principles of environmental justice to life. Words brought to life. Standing Rock exposed the evils and hazards of dirty energy. It educated us non-natives on the issues of sovereignty, educated us on the destruction of sacred sites, and the alignment that the militarized police and the paramilitary forces and the FBI had with the fossil fuel industry. Also, the militarized police, the paramilitary forces, and the men who were building the pipeline, the violence that they have waged against women. So when we fight to stop pipelines, we are fighting to protect our Native sisters. Understand that. When the Dakota Access Pipeline was built, Native youth from the International Indigenous Youth Council launched their historic run to stop the building of the Dakota Access Pipeline. This galvanized the adults, the Standing Rock Sioux tribal members, and thousands from across the country to take on the fossil fuel industry, and this inspired the world. From Chinatown, we began to fundraise for Standing Rock when the Indigenous Environmental Network invited us to come up there. Seeing how our strategies as Asian Americans was intertwined with the struggles of folks at Standing Rock, we accepted. The intertwining of our struggles. What are you talking about, Pam? I'm talking about imperialism, colonialism. I'm talking about the plunder of our homelands for resources. I'm talking about the dropping of Agent Orange and the dropping of the atomic bomb. These are where we're intertwined. And also the fascination with land, native land, and the desire of the West to reach the East. At Standing Rock, Linda Lee from CPA shared her family story of Water is Life. Linda's up there holding the banner, this banner on the side there. Is that Linda there? In 2017, California was experiencing water shortages and rationing due to the drought. Linda is second-generation Hmong and one of 7 siblings who grew up in Sacramento, California. Linda's mom is an incredibly strong and talented woman who, as Linda explains, my mom can grow anything. She said even grow rice. She made a rice patty. My gosh. The fruits of her labor from the community garden that she goes to has fed the family since Linda was 4 years old. Her family relies on what comes out of that garden. And during the drought, the water use restrictions were levied across California. These restrictions not only cut back on how much water people could use, but at what time of day the water would be used. So, for community gardeners like Linda's mom, there was a set time in which they could go and be present at the community garden. Violations of the policy could result in fines and possible legal action. The neighborhood, which is predominantly Laotian, Latino, and Black, were very confused about the policy and how it was going to be enforced. Then they began to notice government cars and police patrolling the neighborhood and the streets, and especially around the community garden. The neighbors felt scared and criminalized. Visits to the garden became very uncomfortable and intimidating. Neighbors, fearful of violating the policy because it was so complicated, started resorting to buying bottled water. And instead of washing their laundry and hanging dry in the sun began to go to the laundromat. It is important that when the governments and the communities work to find climate solutions, that these solutions should not result in unfair burdens, such as the criminalization of the poor. When we returned home from Standing Rock, CPA hooked up with Idle No More, Indian People Organized for Change, and PODER to initiate no DAPO actions directed first at the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, then the Board of Supervisors, and then the San Francisco Pension Fund. These no DAPO mobilizations brought thousands together in the street and engaged in various numerous resistance actions. And there was projects that people took on, projects that would transition away from the status quo, projects that would transition to something else, such as a bank where the city of San Francisco could then withdraw money from Wells Fargo. How about that? Chase, Citibank, and instead deposit city funds into banks that were controlled by our streets and not Wall Street. Public banks. What do you think of that? This is what I feel Grace Lee Boggs meant when she said, a revolution that is based on the people's exercising their creativity in the midst of devastation is one of the great historical contributions of mankind. Then, in July 2017, CPA learned that the Chinese oil consortium, Andes Petroleum Company, was granted permission to explore for oil on indigenous land in the Ecuadorian Amazon, which included the ancestral territory of the Sapara Nation. China's engagement with Ecuador also included a $6 billion loan, which the Chinese has requested to be paid back in oil, not cash. We learned that Sapara leader Gloria Yoshiga-Sante had attempted to deliver a letter to representatives at the UN, the Chinese representatives at the UN. A letter requesting that Andes Petroleum not explore for oil and cancel the contract with the Ecuadorian government. Her attempt to deliver that letter failed as the staff threw the letter into the trash. But Gloria would be traveling through San Francisco on her way back to Ecuador. So I suggested that she attempt to deliver the letter to the Chinese consulate in San Francisco. But before CPA could officially participate in an action like that, it was important that members and staff of CPA fully understand the situation and be in alignment with her issues. A meeting with Gloria found that indeed our members and staff were in alignment in opposing exploration and drilling for oil. But it was a very difficult meeting, not because of language, but because the message on the banner that would be outside the event read, "China out of the Amazon." This greatly disturbed our members because it felt like an attack on the Chinese people rather than on China's exploitation of the land. Finally, one member, he's sitting right there, raise your hand, clarified that in actuality, we were there to say Andes Petroleum Oil out of Ecuador. Once that was clear, the signage of the banner was changed. Zip, zip, zip. The young people know how to work these computers and do these Chinese characters. I mean, it just took them 15 minutes. It was so crazy. And everyone was satisfied The next day, we supporters and others assembled outside the Chinese consulate. The Chinese press was in attendance. Gloria led us to the door to deliver a letter. The representative came out and upon learning about the situation, accepted her letter. Yay! Media coverage of the action went international in Chinese. I mean, international. Everywhere there was a Chinese person in the world, they had access to the story, I'm telling you. A few months later, we learned that representatives from the oil company met informally with Gloria's brother and announced that they were going to reevaluate their plan, which could include not exploring for oil. Yeah! The delivery of the letter made a difference. Gloria has repeatedly shared with others in the Amazon and in their travels around the world about the role of CPA and how CPA and the Asian and the Chinese sisters and brothers there stepped up when others did not. We in CPA saw that the letter needed to be translated into Chinese, and we did that. And we mobilized supporters, and we got out the Chinese press. We are very proud of the role we played to stop oil drilling in the territory of the Sapara people, proving that solidarity is a duty that has real impact. Do you understand? Mm-hmm. Solidarity is a duty that has real impact. The stories that I have shared just touch on the surface of how I think Asian radical imagining. Google keeps misspelling it. That's why it was spelled wrong on this one. I'm changing my wording. But imagining. Is that a word?
Yeah.
Okay.
But Google can't imagine.
I know. There we go. Very good. And environmental justice can contribute to advancing activism and be a vision for change. So needed in these times. As an American, as an Asian American, I want us to push to be even more radical and more visionary. At the U.S. Social Forum in 2010, the Asian Americans held a special event to honor Grace Lee Boggs. Asian young people made presentations. Grace listened patiently. And when it came time for her to speak, her demeanor became stern. And I knew that we were in for some serious schooling. Grace informed us that we were acting like a minority. So what's wrong with that, you wonder? Grace went on to say, stop thinking and acting like a minority and start thinking and acting like a majority. You are thinking like victims. Don't do that. I remember how she said that. Actually, she said that to me too. Don't do that. Okay. Timmy was also in the audience. Timmy Luz was also in the audience. Here we go. Meet Timmy. Grace's words resonated for him, and that led to the formation of the Civic Empowerment Education Fund with Alex Tom. He's sitting over there somewhere. There you are. Raise your hand. Timmy writes, as long as AAPI organizers think that the boundaries of our influence is just with winning justice for our own communities, we are missing a key lesson from Boggs. We, the majority, already have the power to change the world. Even at the local level, he says, elections are an arena that has tremendous impact on people's daily lives. What kinds of social and political transformations could be possible if the electoral system is a place where movements can build power? It's up to AAPIs, people of color, and all oppressed peoples to build the coalitions necessary to challenge and dislodge current political leadership at all levels. So this is a good piece. But do we stop organizing and mobilizing? It's not an easy or, right? We do it all. We do it all. Grace's words are important. Ponder these. And I want you to go back to the preamble of the environmental justice principles. The principles that call on us to decolonize. And that decolonization is not only external, but such as U.S. influence out of Southeast Asia and Venezuela, but also the colonization that is internalized. What can we accomplish when we act as a majority? In 1999, a major explosion happened at the Chevron oil refinery in Richmond, California, followed by 2 more leaks in June and then in July. And this revealed the Contra Costa County's inadequate emergency response system and the daily health risks faced by the residents in this area. Many of the area's residents were either not informed or were poorly informed about the safety procedures, especially for those calling for shelter in place. Among those most impacted are the limited English-speaking residents and the children and the elders. In response, the Asian Pacific Environmental Network's Laotian Organizing Project launched a campaign targeting the county, services, health services, and the Board of Supervisors to demand a multilingual emergency phone alert system. After a lengthy campaign, I think it took about 3 years, the county committed to establishing this warning system. It was a huge victory that LOP launched. It was a victory that not only benefited and protected the Laotian community, but all the residents in Richmond, and also this unleashed power for the Laotian communities. They found their voice, they found their spirit, and they have made a difference ever since. When the Laotian community fought and won, everyone won. I opened my talk with a story about workplace. In the 20 years of my work in the area of workplace health and safety, oh boy, the case which is most difficult for me to control my rage is the case at AXT, a semiconductor manufacturing facility where hundreds of Chinese workers were poisoned by the toxic chemical gallium arsenide. The company produces computer wafers, and in doing so, violated every single basic proper health protection measures for the workers in that factory. They did not provide training in a way that the workers could understand. There was no gloves, no masks, no eye protection, and most importantly, there was no working showers for the workers to decontaminate themselves before they went home to their families. My rage went into full throttle when I learned that the job duty of one of these women was to pound a defective wafer with a hammer into a fine powder so that the materials could be reused. That fine powder is powder that she inhaled. This is completely unacceptable. The number of miscarriages, babies born with physical disability, and cancer is rumored to be very high, but no actual number has been verified. The company has been repeatedly fined by OSHA, Cal-OSHA, and the EPA, but AXT arrogantly ignored these charges and instead laid off these workers and moved the facility, the factory, to China. Even more outrageous for the workers at the Fremont plant was that representatives were sent to Beijing to train the workers to do the job in the exact way they had done the job. And when they returned home to Fremont or to the Oakland or other places that they lived, they had a notice that they were fired. The shadow of cancer and other medical conditions haunt these workers to this day. Now let me ask you a question. What image comes to mind when you think American worker? Did the image of an AXT worker come to mind? Believe me when I say it is extremely difficult for immigrant workers to think and act like a majority, whether it be in the workplace or in the community. I believe that all workers should be able to not only have a voice on the job, but be able to take actions for themselves and their families. To achieve environmental justice for our Asian communities, I believe that it is mandatory to organize for workers, again, the Asian immigrant workers to be able to think and act like a majority. We need to be able to rally around their situation. When the country now is rallying around, which is a great thing, the Green New Deal, the voices and issues of workers like AXT must be included. Do you agree?
Yes.
Last September, in San Francisco, at the People's Climate March, we had a beautiful and spirited presence. We organized and mobilized a contingent of over 200 Asians marching under the banner "From our homelands to the front lines." Asians rise for climate justice. Artists and youth painted a huge, beautiful mural, which was in 13 different Asian languages. APEN conducted workshops on solutions, and we made democracy today. Yeah, it was great. The crisis of climate change has inflicted environmental disaster across our homelands. In Asia, ranging from rising water levels, sea, soil, and water contaminations, dams bursting, typhoons, extreme temperatures, drought, threats to food security, very important, and a host of other assaults, resulting in death, illness, and displacement of millions of people. In our communities, environmental racism can be traced back to white supremacy and economic exploitation that has resulted in our streets becoming militarized, where prisons, detention, and deportation is becoming normalized. When Asians rise for justice, it can look like this. It has been 5 years since Typhoon Haiyan hit the Philippines. The Filipino people have suffered greatly. Last November, NASCON conducted a surgical medical mission to Eastern Visayas. Volunteers from across the U.S. brought much-needed health services and supplies to the fisher folks and peasants impacted by Typhoon Haiyan. Over 800 patients were given medical checkups, and almost 100 surgeries were conducted with the guidance of volunteer Philippine doctors. How do Asians rise? We rise to be present, to serve the people. We rise because we understand that the root cause of our desperate conditions is the same, from here to our homelands. We rise because we are concerned about the growing threat of war in Asia. We rise in solidarity with our shared struggles for liberation, peace, climate, and environmental justice. And for me, this is one struggle, many fronts. The stories that I've touched on, I believe Asian radical imagining and environmental justice can envision a
a vision that has action and has implications for current and then most importantly, long-term change. So perhaps the phrase radicalization today or disaster tomorrow, radicalization today or disaster tomorrow might be a little bit too strong, or maybe not. But in the words of my native and Filipino sister, Shelley Vendiola, she said to me, you know, Pam, you can't rely on the system that got us into this mess to get us out. We can't rely on the solutions that maintain the capitalist status quo. Real solutions come from the frontline struggles. We need to build community power to win, and we need to identify, expose, and reject false solutions. So false solutions, meaning relying on something called the carbon market to solve our problems. Now, I want you to take 3 big, deep breaths. The air that I just inhaled, the air that you just inhaled, the capitalists want to put that air for sale. That is what carbon markets mean. I want you to go home and look up what I mean, because I don't have another 20 minutes to explain it to you now. But it's really important that you yourself understand what carbon markets mean. Finally, to end, we need to organize together to create the greater we. Organize the greater we. And we need to organize and dare to embrace and make real the principles of environmental justice. And finally, we need to organize from a place of love and unity, and in the words of John Trudell, carry on the struggle. Generations surging together in resistance. The power of understanding real connections to spirit is meaning our resistance, our struggle is not sacrifice lost, but is natural energy properly used. Thank you very much. What time is it?
105.
1:05?
Yeah.
Okay. That's good, because I'm hungry and I'm gonna I'm ready to, and also, well, hi, I'm Pam Towley. And my brain cells have all been kind of used up from last night. So I'm just going to just talk to you just for a few minutes. Gee, everything that I've just heard this morning is just so amazing. I've just learned so much. And, you know, this what we're wanting to do in terms of really uplifting the radical tradition. I think that there is just a lot that you've learned here today to really go out there and test it, right, with each other. So one of the things I said last night was this phrase that I came across is radicalization today or disaster tomorrow, right? And then I don't want to say that to scare you, you know, like the word disaster tomorrow, but you know, yeah, you know, what was the word that you used in terms of the moment that we're in today, right? The threat of war, the climate crisis, the far right, the white supremacy. I mean, it's just like, oh, this the shits, you know. And you know, and in terms of what we are here to talk about,
the radical tradition and the uplifting of our Asian movements, to be able to move that forward, and to now to have the opportunity to make it visible. Right? That is what we are here. That is what we're calling on each other to do. I talked about last night from moving from thinking like a minority to thinking like a majority, right? We got to do that together. And everything that you heard today, right? I just want to step back a little bit in terms of, for you, in terms of the radical tradition. And then with a quote. So I have this part of a platform that I want to read to you. It says, "We demand that the United States government halt the rape of the land. We believe that if greedy businessmen, with the help of the U.S. government, do not stop destroying our land, air, water, and streams, the earth would become a lifeless planet of rock and dust." Who do you think wrote that, and what year do you think that was written? Come on, it's okay. There's no, because I've teach, and pregnant pauses are fine. I know them. Okay. There's no wrong answer. Who do you think wrote that, and what year do you think that was written? 1950? Oh, that's good. Keep going. That's a good one. Keep going. 1969. You know where that was written? San Francisco, Chinatown. So what I wanted to say is, in terms of radicalism today, right? We have a history of radicalism, and even on the issue of environment, it was the Red Guard who brought that on the platform. I'm not saying, I'm not boasting, but the Black Panthers didn't have it on there, the Young Lords didn't have it on there, you know, and I'm not boasting, but I'm just saying, in terms of our tradition and the things that we can offer to the movement, we put out there an analysis, a demand. But that demand came from a importance of study. So what was just raised here in terms of the importance of study, we're radical. What do you mean by radical? We're the radical tradition. We're radical because we go to the root cause. That's what we want to understand. If the change that we want to make is going to be real, it's going to be now, it's going to be long-term, it has to be rooted in understanding the root cause of the crisis and the mess that we're here today. So I talked last night in terms of my sister, Shelly Vendiola. She's native Filipina. She says, so how many were here last night already? So you've heard me. Oh, okay, so you heard me. Heard me say that Shelly said, we can't really rely on the mess, on the system that got us here today to get us out of this. And so for us, the study of the system, then analysis of what's going on globally and locally, and understanding the issues of economics, patriarchy, right, white supremacy, all of those things, we have to then not only understand that, but to be able to create ways in which we dismantle that and we create something new. So last night, I heard a young man ask a question about, in terms of we resist, right? Or no, we react. That was it, react. And I thought about it last night before I went to sleep. Things I think about before I go to sleep. The difference between reacting and resistance, right? And so the thing around reacting is you react and then you stop, right? But for me, we want to create a movement of resistance. So be able to get in there and resist, right? With an understanding of the root cause, and then resist and engage and be grounded in that resistance, understanding the particularities of what's going on, and then take from that to identify what kind of change that we need. And so what
the resistance is, it's a resistance for change, right? So when we went for all of the things that we heard about today, we've learned about all the different ways in which we are resisting and that we want change. So understanding that, going out and practicing that. But for ethnic studies, I have to tell you, this is 50 years, right? When we got involved in fighting for ethnic studies, that department was supposed to equip us to change the world. And we got to get back to that because we need the skills, we need the way to analyze system, we need the way to engage with each other, we need active Asian organizations in solidarity with others to form a way in which we are going to change the world. Now, for what I understand, because I was in the academic area at UC Berkeley, as students, you need to know it's cutthroat out there for academics, for the instructors, because they are putting their lives on they want to educate, right? And they have this fine line between being able to educate, equip you with skills, but also to be able to stay on campus to continue to do that work. It is not easy. And so one of the things here is, go out there, change ethnic studies, right? But do it in a way that also protects people like Robin, protects people like Diane, protects the academics that are out there, right? So that's what I'm calling for you to do. Finally, I just want to say in terms of creating the greater we, is not only going out and embracing again in terms of ethnic studies, but I want you to do some homework. If you haven't really engaged in understanding what the principles of environmental justice is, with the preamble of what the environmental justice movement creates, is, I feel, is a reflection of the Black radical tradition and a reflection of what George Murray said, all power to the people, right? All power to the people. It's that preamble. And so go and study it, because I have to tell, I have 30 seconds. We had the environmental justice movement was based on, I didn't know that, okay. But I have to tell you, and it's all recorded, and probably I'm gonna get shit for this, but the funders, the environmental movement, this is too intimidating. You can't be talking about race. You can't be talking about genocide. You can't be talking about decolonization. You can't be talking about taking on the international corporations, right? You can't be talking about national liberation and independence, right? Because that's they don't fund those things, right? They don't fund them. So for me, what I saw was when we were developing regional networks of people to speak for themselves, then all of a sudden the work that we got done from rising our voices from the bottom and the grassroots, all of a sudden that changed to another agenda, right? Green jobs, for example, is one thing. So when you're talking about green jobs, then you don't have to be talking about this kind of stuff, right? It's not that threatening. I am all into green jobs, but I am saying that as a part of this that we want to create. So that's how I want to end this, is go out there, organize, but remember, in the words of John Trudell, organize from a place of love, revolutionary love, organize from a place of an understanding, but you are going to do this because of the love for the people. Thank you.